Oh, is my sound working now? Is it working? Mike? Hello? I'm using the new mic. Let's see, static only. That's not good. It's just. I recorded it, so all else fails, we'll post the recording and I'll get with Mike to find out what's going on because it worked on the recording. Let's see. Can't hear anything. That's a bummer. Oh, it's working? Oh, all right, excellent. I'm sorry. We're trying different things this week to hopefully we reinstalled everything on the computer and hopefully it behaves. If it doesn't, I have a backup plan. Anyway, my name is Samantha Mirabaugh with Melco's application team, and this is our DesignShop Talk. We try to get together once a week to just answer any questions you might have about digitizing, equipment, whatever it might be. So to get started, excellent. It looks like it's working. Fantastic. All right, so to start off with, this was one question that was sent in to applications. Remember, you can email at applications@melco.com. So this is one that was emailed in. And the question was, good morning, everyone in Alaska, and is that Hawaii somewhere? I don't know. All right, so the question here was, I want to do an applique, but how do I make the satin stitch, the cover stitch, be two colors? All right, so over here, I drew this real fast. So to do this, what we're going to do is create an applique first, and then from there, we will create the satin stitch that goes over the top. So if you've never created an applique, you would do it right here. So you select the shape. You can draw it if you want. Hi in Iowa. You select your shape, click on the change element from one type to another, and then select applique. If you want to add it, you would click add. Replace will take this vector and get rid of it altogether and convert it over into there. I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to add. And you'll see now I have an applique. It's two steps. The first step is the walking stitch. The second step is going to be the tack down plus the cover stitch. Now if I go into the properties, I can go turn off, good morning, I could go turn off the cover stitch. All right, so that will leave me with just a placement stitch and then the zigzag. Now, depending on how you're doing your applique fabric, if you're using a cutter like, I don't know, an eyeline or a Roland or something like that, you might be able to get away, or a laser, you can use where just a little bit is stitching off the fabric. But if you're cutting in the hoop, you might be better suited to do, 50-50, 60-40, 70-30. What you'll find is depending on how you cut the fabric out in the hoop, you'll want different numbers. And it does take a little bit of, trial and error to figure out what your preferences are. I always go with 60-40 just because sometimes I use a laser or another cutter and other times I do it in the hoop. Really depends on my mood of the day. So once we have this, now I've got fabric placed down. That's what the walking stitch is on this one, and that I do the zigzag to hold it down. Now we need the cover stitch. So the cover stitch is a satin stitch that goes all the way around, and we want that to also be in multiple colors. So I'm going to take this entire thing and duplicate it. So if you select the shape, come down, right click on it and say duplicate. Now I have two. I don't want to, but I'm going to take the second one, come to operations, and convert object to wireframe. What that does is it takes these two things which are grouped under applique, and it brings them up a level. So as if I were digitizing this manually. I have a walk input, and then I have the zigzag stitch. Good morning in Illinois. All right, so this is currently a zigzag. We don't want that. We want it to be a satin stitch. So I'm going to change it over to a satin, and I probably don't want it to be the same width as my zigzag, so I'm going to make it a little wider. Okay, so now I've got something that looks, oh, we don't want that walk stitch. I'm going to delete it. So I've got my applique. There's the walk stitch, the zigzag to hold the fabric, and now I have the satin stitch. To split it so that you can separate it into different colors, your first step is one, select what you want to modify, which is that. Once you select it, you can click a point. So let's say I want to add a wireframe point right there, and that's where I want to split it. Actually, I'm going to do it right here. All right, so let's say I want to add that point right there, and it's currently selected. If I hold this button down, you'll see there that I have split the element at the selected point. So I'm going to click on that, and it split it right at that point. Now if I come over here, let's do it there, and I again add a let's do it here. I add a wireframe point, then I can say split at selected element. Voila. Okay, so now I have it separated into multiple colors, and I can drag that down so I have overlap. All right, so that's one. Now the original example was cutting it right here at these points, if you will. Okay, so I'm going to select that point this time and split element. Then I'm going to come over here, click on that one, and then again select my split element at selected point. And you'll see now I have one up here. So I've got a bunch of different colors going, right? But now that it was a corner, notice I have an odd effect over here going. So if I choose that, I can move it over. So that's one way I can get this effect here, where it has my point, but it's overlap. But what if you don't want that look? You want it more like a miter. What would you do? Well, let's do that over here. So I'm going to add a point. Let's say there. I'm going to delete the one I just did there. All right, so I've got a point. I'm going to split the element and select this, hit delete. So now I want to basically create a mitered segment here. So I'm going to use my column 1, which is this one right here, and I'm going to just digitize that miter in there for me. So let's say we're going to do that. Backspace. If you click a point that you didn't want to, just hit backspace and it'll get rid of it. You can go again. So I'm going to go about here. There we go. Maybe something like that. And I want that to be up with the green guy. Let's make that green. Okay, so I've got half my miter. Same with this guy. I want to split them down here, or I could just delete the point. You don't have to use split. You could just delete the excess point. And again, I'm going to digitize my miter in there. Okay. So now you've got a different look for that edge. Okay, so you can split these however you want. You would select the point, hit split element. Notice when you do it on a straight segment, it basically goes one element straight into the other, so you don't have to play with it. It's at the corners where you're going to have to play with them some. And so you can see. Okay, so that was the first question we had. Let's see, what else do we have? All right, so that's how we split the top stitching into multiple colors. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's keep going. Can we demonstrate how to do a walk stitch and avoid trims between everything? So let's say you're tracing along a shape, or you're tracing around, and every time you end an element, you don't want it to let me read a question real quick. Can you show how to do a variegated thickness satin stitch line? Yeah. Okay. Let's do that before I move on to this so I don't forget it. DesignShop. So the satin stitch that goes from thick to thin is similar to what I just did for this little column, but let's see. I just want something to trace, so let me see if I can find a script. That one, that's fine. Let's make it bigger so I have something to look at. Okay, so I'm going to go from thin to thick, and I'm going to just convert this over to a vector so I don't have to look at the stitches. There we go. All right. I don't like how that converted, but that's okay. So satin stitches, when they're going from, you have different kinds, right? So I've got my single line center. A single line center is a constant width column, so it's a constant width of every stitch for your satin stitches. Okay, now if I get rid of that, and let's say now I want to do something that's variable width, so it's going from thin to thick and back and forth, that's going to be these column stitches. You have either a column 1 or a column 2. They are, it's generally a column 2 is something that if you have a very organic shape, something that changes from side to side, a column 2 is generally easier to use. A column 1 is input with pairs of points. So I'll say I have a strong preference to using a column 1, but it's not for a good reason. It's when I first started learning the software, before I bothered taking any classes, I thought that was the only button that was there. I didn't realize these little arrows were flyouts. So I thought the only way to make columns was a column 1. So that's why I did it for so long that it's become my default. Hi, Edith. All right, so a column 1, basically how that works is you go from one side to the other with pairs of points. And keep in mind, those pairs of points are also your stitch directions. So I just started that shape, and now I'm going to kind of go from thicker to thinner. I'm going to make it wider than this art. See, I never follow shapes directly. Okay, so let's say just there's a column, right? So I went from something thin to thick, back down to thin. So that's using a column 1. You notice there's some fill in the middle of this. That's because those stitches are rather wide. So if I measure them, you'll see that this is, what, 75 points? Okay. In the properties, that is what's governing whether that's going to be fill or satin. Okay. This number right here says if any stitch length from one side of the wireframe to the other gets larger than this, it's going to convert it over into fill. So if I don't want that, what do I have to do? I have to make it narrower, less than 60, or I have to increase that number. I would caution against making that too big, because then your stitches get really long and they're more prone to snagging. Okay. So Rebecca, hopefully that answered your how do you do the variable width satins. So it's literally column 1, column 2, or column 1, you go from left click, right click, however you want, and it'll allow you to change the satin stitches. Just make sure you don't get them over 60 to 70 points wide, and you'll avoid having that fill broken out in there. Now a column 2, this one right here, is rather than having to pay attention to both sides at the same time, you can trace one side of your element entirely and then go trace the other side. So let me go open some art just to have something to trace other than the mess I'm making at the moment. So I'm going to go to designs, graphics. Everyone has this. So they're in here. There's this columns.bmp. I'm going to open that, and it's really big. I'm going to make it smaller. Okay. So this guy right here. So if I do a column 2, so that's the one that looks like 2 parallel lines, I can trace this all the way across, focusing only on one side of my element. Okay. When I get to the end, I hit enter, and now I'm going to go trace the other side. And my graphics card. Just ignore the lines for a moment. It'll stop. Okay, hit enter. It'll rough in the stitches. Notice my arrow. I'm pointing at my computer screen. That's helpful. Notice my arrow is a little different. It's an arrow with a line between it. That's my stitch direction. It's the same as this icon right here. That allows me to now left click and drag to straighten out my stitches. So anywhere that you want to change how the stitches are laying, just left click and drag and it moves them around. Okay, so again, this goes from thick to thin. Whereas if I did the same shape using a column 1, I would have to pay attention to both sides at once and always go top to bottom, top to bottom. So notice normally I wouldn't have to have a right click, where I just, right here, I wouldn't need a right click. I could just go up here. But because I have to do a, because I have to do a click down here, I'm going to need one here. So it's a little bit more complicated to think about with a column 1 if you have to keep track of both sides of the shape at once. So it's really a personal preference. Like I said, I have a strong preference to using column 1, but it's not for a good reason. So that column 2 is a little easier when you have things that vary from side to side. Okay. Oh, this one, how do we do a walk stitch without having a bunch of trims between everything? Okay. So back to DesignShop. Did I miss any other questions? Doesn't look like it. Okay. I'm going to go open, cancel that. File open. I'm going to go open lines.bmp. This is also a file you have. It's really just so I have something to trace. Okay. So when you're doing a walk input, first it's that one right there. All right, so you start with your left click, and now I'm tracing along. And let's say I get tired of this, and so I hit enter, and that's where I ended. That's where that propeller is. If I select the shape over in my project view, you can see there's my start point, there's my stop. When I go back to, when I want to avoid a trim, what you want to make sure you're paying attention to is that your starts and stops are near one another. Okay, so I click on this walk input, and there's a little propeller right there. All right, so that propeller is where what I just digitized ended, where I stopped. So as long as I start my next element near that propeller, I'm going to avoid a trim. So if I start here, and then I right click, left click, right click, left click, right click, left. All right, I'm going to go end up here somewhere. Okay, so you can see if I turn off my graphic, between here, there's no trim, right? There's no trim right there, even though it's two separate elements. But now if I want to continue, let's say I start here and draw, you can see the gap, there's an actual trim at that location. If I update my auto trims, you can actually see the trim appears in my project view here. So to get rid of that, what you would need to do is two things. Either move this closer to that and update your trims and see it goes away, right? So that's one way. Or modify your properties. So notice it's automatically toggling between trim and no trim. And notice that I have it 29 points apart now. Well, the property that's driving that is right here. So if you go into select your walk elements, right click, go to properties, then click on tie in, tie off, you'll see right here there's an auto trim of 20 points. What is that telling you? That tells you that if from where one element ends to where the next one starts, if that distance right there measures more than 20 points, it's going to insert a trim, and then it will, do a trim, move to next spot, tie in, and keep going. All right. So if you don't want that, you can make this number bigger. 64 points, I wouldn't go any bigger than that. 64 points is close to a quarter inch. That's a really long piece of thread. It's going to be prone to snagging and whatnot. I personally prefer things less than 32, and if I'm honest, I usually do 20 points. It's a personal preference, and you will find everyone who digitizes starts to build their own library of what works for you, what looks good to you. We all have our own styles of how things, appear. But that's how it is. So when you're digitizing your walks, you literally just want to make sure you're starting near there. As long as you're close, you won't end up with a trim. If you want to check your work, you can always click this button, update auto trim, and if a trim appears, so let me force a trim in. So let's say I thought I digitized this with no trims, and oh no, there's one right there. What do? Well, I look at where this element ended and where the one after the trim started, and I just need to put those points closer together. And then update my trim, and you'll see it goes away. All right, so that is this one. All right, this one was, how do you preview a stitch out? Okay, so that is what's referred to as a slow redraw. So a redraw is right down, you notice at the bottom of the screen, you've got all kinds of information. And there's this play button down here. Well, that was super fast, right? So if I move this number down to something lower, so I have it at 1, and now I redraw, look how slow that draws it out. So this is a way you can preview how your design is going to sew out. I use it a lot just to double check to make sure I've done things how I thought I did, that I have appropriate underlay for whatever I'm going to sew on, things like that. Okay, so you can speed it up, you can jump forward. So if I go back to my silly little sun, where's my sun? There it is. So if I hit play on that one, you can see it's drawn around. I can use this button here to kind of fast forward if I don't want to watch everything. Okay, so you can jump forward through designs and whatnot, but this is your redraw. You can speed it up or slow it down. The higher the number, the faster it's going to redraw. Okay, let's see. Yeah, see how fast that goes? All right. Let's see, anyone else type questions in? No. All right, so we'll go back over here. Why are settings like 3D view and active hoop not basically when you save a design, when you reopen the design, how come they don't stay however they were when you saved it? Those are settings within the software that are persistent to the software, not to the files you're using. So that data, how the display modes are, they stay with the software. So if I am in 3D view, I open a file, every file I open will be in 3D view. If I am in wireframe view, everything I open will be in wireframe view. It's just how the software is. So it doesn't save to the file, it's persistent to the software. Oh, I like this one. We do a lot of text and name embroidery, and I want the text to fit to a max. How do you do it? All right, so I got an example here. Okay, so let's say this is what I want. I want to have some sort of, I want to have some sort of logo, a specified distance between the logo and my text, and then text that is set up so that I can, when I change the names, if I can spell my own name, the size doesn't change. Did you see that? So no matter what name I put, if I hit, I'm going to do auto apply. So no matter what name I set here, it's keeping the same size of everything. So how do I do this? Okay, so let's see how we did it. So first off, I set up some graphics. So I've got my little logo. I know that I want a 1/4 inch of space here. So what did I do? I drew a little line. This is a vector line I use right here. So I literally, if you've not done it before, left click, hold alternate to keep it straight. I usually just draw a line of any size, and then down here change it to the size I want under this width. Okay, so position that where you want it, and then I drew a vector rectangle. Is there a way to rotate a design 90 degrees without doing it manually? I'll come back to that, Rebecca. Yes. All right, so to draw a rectangle vector, if you haven't done that, it's this last button all the way over. Click on that rectangle, and I usually just draw a shape that's relatively close to what I want, and then down here make it the actual size. So if you turn off this button right here, that gets rid of the lock aspect ratio, so I can make it 2 inches by 0.5 tall. Okay, so let's say that's the size shape. So position the line in the box relative to my logo, and now I've got at least some guide work to play with. All right, so now that we've set this up, now we need some text. So type my text, and that's too big, so we're going to make it smaller, and right now I'm just getting it to fit using the little handles here. Get it close. All right, and there. All right, so now how do we set it up to do what I did before? Well, let's go into the properties, and instead of having this set as a line type straight, we're going to change it to line type envelope. When you do that, here, I'll drag this up so you can see it. Notice it puts a line above and below. What this does is it takes whatever you have typed and it's going to stretch it to fill that area. So this happens to be a rectangle, but watch if, here, just for grins, I'm going to fix it. So if I'm going to do this without the prep work that I did, where it was already the size I wanted. So see, the text is scaling to fit between the lines. Note you can also add points between these and drag it around. So if you want text to be in the shape of a bear, like Mama Bear or something like that, this is what you would do. You just add your points to get the shape you want. So now that it's set to envelope and it's set to the shape I want, I can come in here and type whatever I want and it will stay. So if you're doing something that's serialized, let's say you're doing numbers 1 through 70 or whatever, you can have a box set up that you just change the number and the digit, the lettering will stay exactly in the same place for every iteration that you do. It'll just stretch or squish it to fit. All right, so that's your line type envelope. There's a question, is there a way to rotate a design 90 degrees without doing it manually? So manually would be select your shape, click on it till these handles are, so those little boxes are open, and then I can hold the basically rotate it around until you get close. I'm one for precision, so I would rather rotate it 90 or 45. So again, you select the shape. Down here, you'll see there's a W or an H. If you click on one of those, a little box will pop up. It doesn't matter which one you click on, they bring up the same screen. So if I want to rotate 45, I can say 45. If I want to rotate negative 45, I can put it back. If I want to do 90, negative 90, so on and so forth. Okay. If you want to flip it 180, the fastest way to do a 180 flip is actually using these two buttons here. It doesn't matter what order you click them in, just click them back to back. So 1, 2. Like I said, it doesn't matter. That's a 180 flip. Okay. All right, so let's see, what else do we have? What other questions? All right, so we did that. Let's see. Why is the hoop we select in DesignShop not automatically transferred to the MOS? It would make a lot of sense. So that is a safety issue. All right, so if I'm the only one operating machines, and so I digitize it, I send it to the machine, and I'm going to hoop and go, it's fine, right? So I know what I did. I know I selected a 15 centimeter round hoop. I know I hooped my shirt with 15 centimeter round. I'm good to go. But if you have other people working with you, or if you have people coming in to help offload work, whatever it might be, you really want those operators to be paying attention. You don't want to accidentally transfer over so the machine thinks you're loading an XL hoop on there. Okay, big hoop. So you've sent it over, the design, it thinks it's an XL hoop, but in reality, your operator grabbed the 16-inch square, for instance. Okay, it seems about right. If they do a trace, they should see the dot hitting the hoop and go, oh wait, something's wrong. But what if they don't do that? Then you're going to have hoop strikes. Okay, so I would highly recommend, it doesn't transfer simply because we want the operators to pay attention and to make sure they're selecting the hoop that they're actually holding in their hand when they put it on the machine. Okay. What other questions? Someone typed one in. Let's see. Can I use my fonts from library in Adobe Illustrator? Can you use fonts from other softwares? Kind of. Yes. You can use any TTF font, so TrueType font. OTF fonts don't work. So if you've created your own TTF fonts, when you install them into Windows, you would close DesignShop, install it into Windows. When you open DesignShop, that will then show up as a font. So all your Windows-based fonts are all under this TrueType category. So, anything you might have installed or found from wherever, they all show up down here and you can use them. Now keep in mind, sometimes they work great, sometimes they don't. I don't know if you've ever seen Bleeding Cowboy font. That one, it doesn't do well. I mean, it's a paint spatter, so it's not really suited to embroidery, whereas others are just fine. So it really depends on the font. But just remember, some people install a font and then they go, hey, it's not showing up. Why? And it's because they installed it as an OTF and not as a TTF. Okay. All right, back to okay, so we did that one. Active feed settings. This is a similar train of thought as to why the hoops don't transfer. So let's say I have a logo or a design. I'm going to put it on a handkerchief, and then I'm going to go put it on a minky blanket. I'm going to choose different settings with my active feed, even though the logo is the same. So you really want whoever's running your equipment to think about that and know, hey, I might have to up the active feed on this minky blanket versus my handkerchief. I need the thread a little bit tighter. So it doesn't transfer because of that. You want to make sure you're thinking about what you're doing and making the best decisions for the garment in front of you. Okay. I can't find a video where you went over the subtract feature. How do you do that? And how do I remove stitches under an object? These are the same thing. So let's do that. I'm going to make a new file and I'm going to draw a rectangle. So to do that, I'm choosing my complex fill and then my little rectangle input tool because I love it. So there you go. Sorry, I'm a comedian today. All right, and then my complex tool and a circle, and let's make it a different color just because. Notice if I want it to be an actual circle, I hold the shift key. Okay, so now I have a rectangle and an overlapping circle, and why don't we do a name? There we go. All right, so I don't want all this blue fill underneath my circle. All right, I want to subtract that. So how do you do it? Whatever you want to remove stitches from, select that first. So I want to remove stitches from this rectangle, so I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to hold my control key and select the circle. Then you'll notice these buttons appear. One's for combining elements, one's for subtracting. If you right click on it before you do anything, notice there's a feature that you can set how much overlap. I'm going to change that to 0, and then we'll redo it with it being a bigger number. So if it's set to 0, which is the default, when I click subtract, notice my wireframes are 1 to 1. So I have no stitches overlapping unless there's pull compensation, right? That's the only thing that's going to cause overlapping along here. Okay, so that's line to line, which if you're going to come back over it with a satin stitch, that might be fine, right? But if you want that to not show fabric or not to have gaps between it, maybe we should have a little bit of an overlap. Okay, so I just undid it. I'm going to select the shape, select the circle. This time I'm going to right click on subtract element. I'm going to 10-point overlap. So I just typed in 10 and hit OK. Now I'm going to say subtract elements. Look at what we got. Now I've got a circle and that notch cut out of my rectangle, and look, there's overlap there. What overlap should you use? 10 is good. It's a safe number for kind of universally. Most people can hoop well enough and choose stabilizers well enough that 10 points is just fine. If you know what you're doing, you've got a really good handle on your stabilizers, on your settings in your machine, you can go lower. I mean, I've routinely will go lower than that, between 5 and 7, but it's safer to make sure you have the overlap there than to get into a situation where you chose too little and now you have a gap. Okay, so that is subtract, and it works with more than fills. So let's say I want a SAM-sized hole in what's left of my rectangle. Again, you select what you want to remove stitches from first. Hold your control key, choose whatever you're subtracting, click the subtract button, and now look, I have a SAM-shaped hole in my box. All right, so that is subtracting. Combining works a similar way. If I take the shape, so I'm going to take the rectangle and the circle, and now I'm going to click combine elements. Now it's all one shape. Okay, what else do we have? How do you create your own alphabet? For example, handwriting. Well, Scott did, I think, a 45-minute or an hour-long video on that in the past. There's links here. I'll put them in the comments after I'm done here. But it's quite involved. And the short of it is this way. You come over to DesignShop and start a new file and digitize your fonts. Is what a Pro Plus feature. I know I'm running Pro Plus, so I have all the features here, and I know a lot of what I use is level dependent, like the split feature and is level dependent and things like that. So most likely it is Pro Plus. Oh, good. There's the alphabets. That's what I was talking about. So what I would do is start with a document and digitize your font. So any characters you want, A through Z, whatever it is, all your numbers, all your special characters. And I like to do them in a single file simply because that way I can make sure it's consistent. All my heights are the same, the lower elements are the same, the midlines for everything is consistent across the font. Once you have that, then you would come over here, go to Tools, Alphabet Editor, and create a new one. I have one that I mess with called Testing. And now you can scroll through this, and for each character you want, paste in the different things you digitized. And you just literally go through all these and add as many or as few characters as you want. And every time you add something here, it'll automatically save. So it'll save it to that testing. When you're done, now that font will be a font in your library that you can choose from. Okay. Combining elements, honestly, I don't know if that's a level dependent. I'll have to get back to you on that and type it in. I guess I could do it the hard way and force my software into a different version and tell you. Or you want me to do that? I'll do that. Let me close this. Actually, I probably shouldn't do that. Let me answer the other questions, then I'll do that. All right. So that's how you create your own alphabet. There's a question, if I scan an image to use for digitizing, will the dimensions come on the screen the same size? If not, what do I fix, DesignShop or the scanner? Scanners are going to scan as large or as small as you have the resolution set. So if you're scanning something at 600 dpi, it's going to look a different size than if you're scanning at 72 dpi. All right. Now, honestly, I don't pay any attention to the scan resolutions, because what I'll do is whatever, make sure I have a good quality scan. Once I have a good scan, I'll go and insert the file, whatever picture it is. This is a bitmap. Remember, your scanner is going to create raster-based graphics like a JPEG or a bitmap or TIFF file, things like that. You get them from cameras or from scanners. That's a typical format. Well, what you'll want to do then is when you bring it into DesignShop, the first thing you should do before digitizing is set your art to the correct size. So notice it's non-selectable on the screen. That's intentional. That's because when you're digitizing, you don't want to accidentally drag that art somewhere else. That's annoying, right? So you want it to stay put so that you can trace it. Well, here, to select it, you come into your project view. And I know someone asked before, what happens if I close this? It's okay. It comes back. Right here, some people will go to the toolbars and say, hey, all my toolbars are on, but it's gone. How do I make it come back? It's not a toolbar, it's a project view. So if you click on project view, voila, it's back. So here's cactus, and let's say I want that guy to be 5 inches tall. I would come over to the height and say 5 inches, and now my art's 5 inches tall. I can always double check sizes of things using my ruler and go, yeah, that's about the size I want, or no, and scale it around. Once it's the size you want within DesignShop, now you're good to start digitizing. Okay, so you always want to scale your art first. What else do we have? What happens to a C&D design when I save it as an OFM? I did not get a chance to call the guys beforehand to confirm. I honestly am not 100% sure. I believe all that happens is it adds anything you did in DesignShop. Let's say you set specific colors, you added notes, you added graphics. Any of that, it saves it within the OFM file along with the wireframe data. So it's just saving that wireframe data with the additional information you added. I believe that's it, but I will get clarification on that and get back to you guys. I think this is the last question, yeah. So if you have any others, type them in. But I have Illustrator. What should I save my vector file as to use it in DesignShop? So when you're using Illustrator, you can save it as an SVG or EPS. I usually save SVG, mainly because I use it with other softwares for cutting fabric out, whether it be the Silhouette or my laser. Now, but honestly, I don't save it off them that way. I usually save it as an AI and just straight up copy and paste it. So if you go to Illustrator, take whatever vector you have, select what you want to bring into DesignShop, just select it on the screen, hit Control-C, come over to DesignShop and do Control-V, it'll paste the vector straight in here. So that's what I do. I usually just save it off as, oh, Mike just told me what my C&D question, I answered it right, so he just confirmed it. Sorry. What was I saying? Oh, the vector. So you copy it, paste it into Illustrator, and then it's there for you to use within DesignShop. So that's my favorite way to do it. Save off all the Illustrator files straight as AI. That avoids having to create a bunch of different files that are just not native to Illustrator anyway. And you copy it, paste it in here, and you're done. Okay. So, did we have any other questions? Let's see. I'm scrolling through. I'm looking over here at the comments just to see if there's anything I'm missing. Well, I'm excited the computer decided to cooperate today. So that's a nice change. We got it all updated, new version of OBS and all of that fun stuff. So, if there's no other questions, I guess we'll call it a day. I'll wait a second, see if anyone else types fun stuff in for me. No? All right. Well, you guys remember, if you have questions, send them over to applications@melco.com. Type them in on here. Ooh, here we go. Someone typed one in. Does the same 10% scaling rule apply if you digitize a design, or would you need to redigitize it at a larger size? So if you design it native to DesignShop, in other words, it's all wireframe based, the properties are going to stay with that wireframe, and it will recalculate all the stitches. So you can scale it all you want, right? So I can take something and make it bigger. Now, will there be, if I designed it for something super small and I scale it really big, there are probably sections of it that I'm going to want to redo, because some of my satin stitches might blow out to look more like fills when I really wanted them to stay satin. So no, the 10% rule doesn't apply. You can scale it all you want. Just keep in mind, the larger or smaller you try to compress things, the more you have to clean up. Okay, so that's the only thing I would comment on that. It's all, when it's wireframe based, it's all property based, so it's going to recalculate the stitches out to where they go. But I always try to stay within reason and double check it. If you go from really large to really small, you'll end up with more problems, because things will get too narrow that you're smaller than the size of a needle. So you're basically going to stab in the fabric in the same spot multiple times, which no machine likes to sew that way. So I always just scale within reason and then double check it. Make sure things make sense. You don't have things too narrow. You don't have things so wide that the look is different from what you're wanting. Okay. All right, well, thank you for joining me today. Remember, sending your questions to applications@melco.com. You can type them in on this one next week. I'll scan through the comments on this video to make sure there's nothing new that was typed in. Yeah. So you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you guys next week. All right? Thanks. Bye.